Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gaëtan Verna, and I'm the director of the Power Plant. So welcome to tonight's artist talk in the context of our summer exhibition. So thank you for joining us for our tonight's artist talk with Mexican artist Pedro Reyes. This summer, the Power Plant is pleased to present the Canadian premiere of Sanatorium, a transient clinic conceived by Pedro Reyes to provide short, unexpected therapy sessions aimed at curing the ills associated with urban living. As Torontonians, I think we can all get a good dose of Pedro's therapy to make us move forward. So I invite you to join us again for a free opening party on Friday, June 27th, starting at 8 p.m., and be one of the first to see this brand new exhibition. I would like to take this time to particularly thank the Jack Weinbaum Family Foundation, as they are the lead donors for this exhibition and our entire summer program. So thank you very much to Carol Weinbaum and Nigel Schuster for their support. Yes. We would all need more Carol Weinbaums and Nigels in our world, and we're really lucky to have them support our exhibition and the work of the gallery. So thank you again to both of you for your amazing support. We'd also like to thank the Consulate General of Mexico because they were instrumental in enabling us to bring Pedro's work here, and are also sponsoring part of our Circle of Supporters opening. So a great big thanks to the entire team of the Consulate General of Mexico here in Toronto. And last but not least, I would like to thank our support donors, Elena and Jorge Sony, as well as Marla and Larry Wasser. Once again, people from Toronto who just, phoned us up and said, we'd like to support the exhibition. And in the meantime, they've also supported us by having us over to dinner for a great family dinner with Pedro and his son, Cristobal. So again, the warmth of Torontonian is expressed through their generosity and the support of the Power Plant and our exhibition. So I would also like to thank all of the volunteers who have generously offered their time to us this summer to serve as therapists for this exhibition, and without whom this show would not be possible. For those of you who might not know, in order for Pedro's work to actually come to life, we have had to recruit close to 40 volunteers, therapists, because in Pedro's work, Sanatorium, he insists that the exchange be given between volunteer therapists that he trained for the last 2 days, and they will be conducting the therapies. And so we found them, and really it's going to be a really amazing project, because not only is it about his artwork, but it's also this notion that these volunteers that are not professional therapists, that are everyday people interested in giving their time for the exhibition, will be the ones interacting with the public. And we know from past experience that both the therapist as well as the participant get as much out of the experience. And this idea of having the visitors and the volunteers as catalysts for the artwork is really a genius idea. And finally, I would also like to acknowledge our primary education sponsor, CIBC, for their generous support for all our education public programs over the years. CIBC has been supporting the Power Plant for more than 25 years, and that, again, is something that I'm never tired of thanking them for their continued support. And tonight's program is free to members of the Power Plant and their guests, so we encourage you to become a member to take advantage of this discount as one of the many benefits of memberships. And members, again, are patrons that support the gallery, believe in what we do, and we thank them always for their support. So now, Let me please welcome our Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant, Christine Bowen, who will introduce Pedro Reyes. Thank you very much.
So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Pedro Reyes. Originally trained as an architect, Pedro Reyes works with an expanded notion of sculpture to address the interplay of physical and social space, calling for political and economic participation. Interested in reimagining institutions, he uses art as a way to encourage collective and individual agency. His works take on a variety of forms, from a series of inhabitable vinyl sculptures called capulas to a TV production entitled Baby Marx featuring Karl Marx and Adam Smith as puppets. In 2008, Reyes started his ongoing project Palas por Pistolas, which I believe he'll speak to you about more tonight, where 1,527 guns were collected in a voluntary donation campaign and melted down to produce an equal number of shovels to plant the same number of trees. In 2011, Reyes initiated his project Sanatorium, which is set to open at the power plant on Friday. Originally commissioned by the Guggenheim Museum in New York, Sanatorium has traveled to Documenta 13 in Kassel and to Whitechapel in London. To date, more than 20,000 people have participated in individual or group therapies, and we are thrilled to provide Toronto audiences with the next opportunity to engage with this work. Reyes lives and works in Mexico City, but as Gaetan mentioned, he is currently on location here training the volunteers who will run the therapies in the Sanatorium project this summer. We are delighted he has taken the time to speak with us tonight, so please join me in welcoming Pedro Reyes.
Thank you so much, Gaetan and Christine, for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here, and it's been we have spent the last days as with the volunteers who's going to activate the project. It's been a great experience, and I hope that it will be a nice event on Friday when we start operations. Thinking of, I would like to perhaps start showing some few works, and then because the Sanatorium is a show that we will open in Power Plant, explain that particular project in greater depth. Many of these works, I consider myself mainly a sculptor. I am very interested in how, forces in space and how the space can be activated, and how an object can create a situation, like a social situation. So, for instance, this piece, just to show few works. This is called Leverage, and it's. I start by showing you this image because it's just like a kind of exhibition space where people find this kind of seesaw, and then someone may want to ride the seesaw, and then you have to persuade other people in the room that are by chance stopping at that same gallery to join and then participate in a game. So I am very interested in how an object can, for a brief period of time, activate the space, and here the idea of leverage, for instance, you often associate with, like one person who has more power than others, but actually, like that single player needs the other 9 players to wield his influence. So it's interesting to see how, like this is a way to visualize the kind of asymmetry present in most human organizations. And then, for instance, like this is a chair, which also, like has like it's like a very simple principle that has fingers that are articulated. And then whoever passes and sits and may leave a message or a kind of a sign to the next person. But it's, like a kind of minimum degree of interactivity that still, like mixes form and function. And something as individual as a hat that is, like a kind of like a very much a symbol of individuality, and in the case of these kind of props that I started doing around the year 2000 and taking them to public squares in Mexico, just to see what kind of situation was to be created. And obviously, like as at the moment that you have a hat that has to be weared by different people, what kind of, how do people get to agree on where to move, and some people arrive and then others leave. So it's just like a kind of, I so often think that I do big toys for people to play. And others, like maybe sculptures that have to do with how do we experience a space. I had my formation as an architect, and at the beginning I wanted to challenge, like what I was, what I had learned in school. So, like I was thinking, okay, how can I create like a different kind of space? So let's think of, like what are the elements of a built, like the constructed space? No, let's say that you have walls, and most walls are square. So I'm gonna try to do something that is based on curved lines. Then most walls are grounded on the floor, so I'm gonna try to do something that is floating. Then, like a wall is rigid, so I'm gonna do something that is elastic. A wall may block the light from inside and outside, so I wanted to do something that was like translucent. Like a room may have furniture that is integrated into the space, so I wanted to blur the division between like the surface that was like defining the space and being providing the function of sitting, etc. So all those ideas started to come mixed with an interest in the kind of traditional crafts that are made in Mexico City, which include a lot of basketry, and particularly like these kind of chairs and market bags that are made with plastic that is, when the polymers were introduced in the 50s, and that kind of changed many of the basketry. So, like working with the artisans that do that, I started to weave these kind of big nests then in different shapes. Or also, for instance, like other spaces that are meant to create situations that are social situations, such as this floating pyramid that was made on a show in Puerto Rico that was, like the idea of floating island. Islands have been always associated with the idea of utopia, and I wanted to do something that was like not like floating in the water, but not quite a vehicle, but because most of man-made constructions in the water are meant to move from one place to the other, but not so much to dwell in the sea. And the idea was to have like this kind of a very psychedelic vision of a floating pyramid, same as you see a pyramid in the desert, but you saw a pyramid in the sea, like a total trip. And then people would like swim to this pyramid, and then their behavior started to change also. So, it became like a place where people were getting naked and having sex and, like doing all this kind, and it was like, you would always arrive to the pyramid and blush because you would like find something happening. So, like also like almost like this kind of territory that was, like an independent state or territory, where people would also leave their kind of social conventions in the shore. So, I'm thinking of these spaces in terms of, how can sculpture modifies or facilitates certain kind of social or interactions. And, like in the case of Sanatorium, I will try to explain about how certain props or sculptures also trigger activities, but in this case, perhaps some of them intended to a kind of psychological and individual like a situation when you may have an insight or something, and sometimes, like in the case of group therapies, also how can you find structures that are facilitated by these invisible relationships that become material through the use of objects. This is a picture of the sanatorium as it was installed during Documenta in Kassel, and the sanatorium actually came into existence as a compilation of many experiments that had happened in workshops. I was often invited, like probably like 10 years before the sanatorium. I had, like as many other artists, given a number of workshops in museums through educational departments or in schools, or doing creates with art students, etc. And in developing these kind of workshops, I was finding resources in different cultural environments. So let's say like theater or psychology or conflict resolution techniques, and I thought at first, to then, bring them out of that kind of context that is often, a private and only experienced by those that sign up to these workshops, and bring it to the exhibition space, no? So, because the exhibition space, it's always, the experience is very much defined by the user, and as user or as visitors to a gallery or a museum, we kind of walk quite fast through the space, and then we identify immediately who made what and what is it there, and then as soon as we have that kind of like quick constellation, we leave the room, and I wanted to create a kind of slowdown in the exhibition space, and also a radical transformation when the person, instead of coming to the gallery or to the museum to see something about that was a story told by the artist, it was more about creating a platform for the participant or the public to tell their own story, to bring their own narrative into the project. So the sanatorium as a this is, for instance, like the installment at Watt Chapel, and this is the installment at an offsite a place in Brooklyn where that was the first edition produced by the Guggenheim Museum. You arrive to the place, to the sanatorium, and there's like this kind of a painted, that walls that are painted in like a little bit like an hospital, a number of people that are in lab coats. And the lab coat in itself has certain association with, like a doctors perhaps, but not strictly, like also a butcher or someone like a student in a lab may wear one. So it's interesting that, it's like very, very, very accurate what is the kind of cultural connotation. It varies from context to context, so I wanted to play a little bit on that. And then you arrive, and depending on a number of questions, and you maybe ask what is going on and what is like where you're visiting, and like what kind of area of your life would you like to improve? So it's like immediately you're told that this is a place that is not hospital, that where you will deal with things about the body, but more about like dilemmas of your existence, no? Like I remember, like the kind of problems that people will tell, I don't know, like for instance, I don't know, let's see, people may say, I am not sure if I'm gonna marry the right person, or it's been ages since I don't talk to my sister, or I really don't think that I am in the right job, or I'm not sure if I should stay in the city. Whatever the question may be, you are then referred to a number of different therapies. At the beginning, there were 16 different. Now, it's been somehow distilled into the ones that have proven to be more successful. Yet we're testing a new one now in Toronto, which we were just like running focus groups and testing it ourselves. It's a new therapy called the extraction of the cup in the head, and it's well, I may explain what is it about later. But let me tell you a little bit about the different therapies that, for instance, like this one right now is the Museum of Hypothetical Lifetimes. And, for instance, like the models, like architectural models, are not only used by architects, like, for instance, like curators, when planning a big show, or artists may use a model to plan an exhibition. And an exhibition, like if you think of a big exhibition, like a retrospective, a survey, or an historical show, often like taking many rooms, it's a way of putting in space, like someone's life, and I thought that it was interesting to use the metaphor of the exhibition as a self-portrait, no? So for the public or participant to be able to make a quick autobiographical sketch by choosing objects, the objects that you see on the shelves, and then you have like these different rooms that represent kind of moments in someone's life, and it's obviously like it's an extremely oversimplified idea, but let's say that you have on the right, top right, you have like a shape that is like a pill, that is called the cradle, that is where your life starts, but you arrive to the pill through these circle and squares that are number 13 and 14, that is your mother and your father. So the therapist will ask you, okay, like choose an object that represents your mother, and then you go to the shelves and pick one object and place it there, and then you pick another to represent, your grandparents and so on. So you start, with your genealogy, so to speak, and then next you have your education years, that are those kind of square spaces that grow in size, and they represent, like how as we start school, we have like increasing responsibilities, increasing knowledge and conditioning, and so the 11, which is like the kind of shrinking space, is like the play space that is being smaller and smaller, but then on the other side that you have like this kind of asymmetric line is, truancy and rock and roll and drugs and parties and friends and everything that you do in your teenage years. And then you're expelled of those kind of phase of education onto the world of work and the world and your personal life. So the world of work is represented by the right angles, and the world of love or your personal life by the curved lines. And in 17, you find like a little maze that is, like all the odd jobs that you do when you're trying to, choose a career, etc. And then you may accept a label or call yourself something, which is number 18, the I am a quotation marks. And then number 20 is called the legacy, for that is what you want to be remembered for. 21 is like the career as you want to develop. And you have other spaces. For instance, on the top you have the different curved spaces, like the 8 is these unfinished circles mean your exes. So you do this kind of different. You have this template, which is kind of like a quiz, so it's kind of very basic and has the risk of oversimplifying things. But for a quick therapy session, at least helps to just provide that platform, and then the person is doing this activity. We may explain what the subjects are. So the idea is that when we're children, when we're kids, we tend to arrange objects in the floor to create mental maps of what we perceive as exterior world, no? So models of work or of family, of policemen chasing, thieves or whatever. Game playing is a way to create maps or models of the world. So the idea is that objects create shortcuts. So instead of having to elaborate for an hour or more about what was your relationship with your grandfather, you can just choose an object and then arrive to that kind of associations in a faster way. Another therapy is called the vaccine against violence, and in this one you're given a balloon and you have to blow it and draw in that balloon the face of the person that has hurt you most. That's you have to make a little exercise in memory and then think about someone who perhaps you weren't have kind of forgotten, but someone who was had hurt you or something, and then you put it on top of a punching bag, and you are encouraged to bang and scream and then eventually break the balloon. So it's a catharsis element that I consulted with Antanas Mocus, who's the former mayor of Bogotá, Colombia, who had made these kind of exercises for screening families, who had issues of family violence, and then conducting people to anger management programs. And also with Rafael Montañez Ortiz, who was an artist who started since the 50s, late 50s, to destroy pianos with an axe, and whose work I like very much. So I'm very interested in how some exercises where you are requested to have a violent catharsis, because I believe that we have to have certain spaces for violence. The idea of catharsis in Greek itself means purification, that has to do with extracting toxic interaction that you have kept, but then you're given through this through a sort of ritual the opportunity to get rid of it, to let that steam go out. So I believe that there gotta be many opportunities. I mean, one may be going to a punk concert, and other maybe perhaps to be found in the museum space. This other therapy, for instance, is called the philosophical casino, and it works as an oracle. The relationship with the artwork, it's I believe one-to-one. I believe that the reason why we read a book, or that we go to see a movie, or that we decide to see a show, etc., often is because we want to find something about ourselves, or gain some insight about a situation. So in the philosophical casino, you do that as a kind of oracle. So you ask 3 questions, whatever they may be, and then you have these kind of giant dice or dreidels that have quotes from different philosophers arranged by schools of thought or eras. So there's ones that are Greeks, and others that is from the Renaissance, others are German, others are from the 20th century, different periods and geographies, and then you spin one of these giant dice, and then you get an answer. And the curious thing is that the chance operation charges with a very, very, very a strong meaning this quote. It's and this is unavoidable. It's for instance, a Chinese cookie. It's a very stupid example, but when you read it, you assign you believe that it was a kind of a, even if we know it's the cheapest bullshit. For instance, horoscopes. You don't read an horoscope, your sign, the same way that you read someone else's sign. So it's you tend to assign specific meaning to these things that are supposed to be speaking to you. But instead, so the idea here was that instead of having some kind of cheap advice, then the one that you may find in the newspaper or Cosmopolitan or whatever, is that you find the horoscope. You are you are here it's these very, very serious philosophers are giving you advice, and then the interesting thing is to discuss that with the other members of the group. Because, the way that philosophy was practiced in the beginning was, with this kind of peripatetic situation where you were lying below a tree and talking, and so philosophy was a social activity. And now it's more always based on text, and always in a kind of seminar, in a kind of academic environment, and much of the contemporary philosophy may be done by stand-up comedians, or I don't know who, but the kind of the way that philosophy is detached from everyday life is I think that is because there's missing this kind of conversational aspect of it, and not only the social aspect of it, but also the personal. So it's not so much about what is what the philosophers said about the other philosopher, etc. But I'm interested in rooting that to whatever is that the burning question that you have at this precise moment. What is it that you need to know, and then like let's use these resources just to talk about your issue. So that's why, like the chance operation performs this kind of divination factor. So another therapy is called CT leaks, and here, like many of the therapies of the sanatorium are kind of a secular version of processes that may be found in religion or spirituality or esotericism or psychology, etc. But then, like are somehow made into like they're kind of without that aura, for instance, like if there's an element that comes from shamanism, etc., that kind of ethnological specificity is taken out, and then you just keep the procedure in a kind of this kind of clinical environment, without the kind of the incense and the, it's about like getting rid of all the, like that, the New Age music and whatever may be found in the esoteric world, etc. Yet, thinking about what are these kind of exchanges that nevertheless, like the clinic, like I think that the clinical aspect of museums is another kind of so it also has like a kind of totemic and magical environment, like religion is like a secular, art is like a secular religion, and we have these churches that are called museums, and we do pilgrimages to go places like, I don't know, like Marfa or, like these kind of sanctuaries that are far away, and then you have like these kind of objects that are worshipped as relics. So, I believe that there's like a kind of an interesting anthropological parallelism between the seriousness and the, how we take like a Duchamp's urinal, like an axis mundi that really like rebooted or a kind of a cultural paradigms, no? So, well, that to say that, for instance, like here, a little bit like what is present is the mechanism of confession that you find in Christianity. Here you have to write a secret, and then write a secret, like then when you write that secret, you put it in a bottle, and then in exchange for sharing that confession that you would not tell even your best friend, it has to be like a really dark secret or something that you are very ashamed or very, not ashamed necessarily, but that's something that you just socially don't tell. And, like the liberating act of telling that then is paid by the act of reading someone else's secret. And this has to do with gossip. We find pleasure in gossip. It's a guilty pleasure, because we are talking at the back of someone, and we're sort of celebrating their failures. And this makes us guilty. But why is like where does the pleasure comes from? So I believe that we have such pressure to always conform to the norm and always pretend that we are in control and all that, that seeing someone fail like takes some of the pressure out of our shoulders, and there's a kind of liberation of that weight. No, so here, when you read someone else's confession, you realize that no one is normal, that everybody has issues, and that everybody is a bit crazy and so on. So it's like in religion, perhaps when you have that confession, that you do it through a priest, and that is intended to get absolution from God. You do it, but here there is a kind of social absolution. Like you are letting for someone a secret, and then you will find later, like to read someone, and then it's about, like that kind of, that kind of getting even with the kind of pressure, and it's all done under the big protection of anonymity. So we say that we care about the sin, but not the sinner. So, it's just an example of, perhaps I extended myself about this kind of secular aspect, but I'm interested in how can art provide access to things that perhaps are rituals that are found in other forms of our cultural world, like religion or like gossip, etc., and then that can be presented as a process to trigger certain psychological liberation. The same could be said of Voodoo, which is a doll that is, the doll has been used in witchcraft and many contexts, but almost all cultures have the amulets and so on. And this one you use to desire good to someone. So you place a number of objects in the doll, and you use it to kind of give a plastic form, like a kind of concrete form to the wishes that you have for someone. I'm gonna try, perhaps I should speed up a bit. The compatibility test for couples, which is not in this version of the Sanatorium, but it's basically a number of fruits and vegetables. And you have to choose which fruit represents you and which fruit represents your partner. And then you make a kind of a mix, like a smoothie. And then you judge by by the flavor. You test how compatible you are. And it's like the idea is that it's like a kind of like mixing poetry, like the idea of metaphor with a practical joke. No, how do you like really take the metaphor and like taste it, and so it's a kind of organoleptic or synesthesia. So, well, there's other number of therapies that have been done of the Sanatorium, but I will leave that to, hopefully you can visit the show and experience yourself some of the therapies. And then use a little bit of the remaining time to show you some other projects. Briefly, for instance, the idea of social sculptures now that term that was very much used by Joseph Beuys, and whom I have always admired, the 7,000 Oaks. I was interested in that idea, and I actually was once interviewing Alexandro Jodorowsky, and he had created he was kind of one of my resources or advisors for some of the therapies of the Sanatorium, and he had created a therapy that is called, a kind of method that is called psychomagia, and most of his psychomagical acts end up with planting a tree. And planting a tree is a kind of I asked him, why do you wrap up many of these rituals with planting a tree? And he says, it's because, it's, when you want closure, you need also like a beginning of a new thing. And I was, experiencing, how the violence in Mexico has raised because of the large number of weapons that are entering Mexican territory. I thought of, putting together the fact of, all the weapons and how could they be transformed into an agent of life. So I organized a campaign that consisted in inviting people to give up a weapon, and I organized this in Culiacán, in Mexico, where a collector was patron of a botanical garden with a great contemporary art program. And I told him, why don't we organize a campaign and we melt the weapons that we collect and make them into shovels to plant trees. So we collected 1,527 shovels that then were made into, 1,527 guns that were melted and made into the same number of shovels to plant the same number of trees. I actually, 2 years ago, I planted one not far from here in Guelph, and there's another that has been planted in Vancouver, and it's nice that I have got pictures of how those trees have grown, and the process of planting the 1,527 trees has been very nice. And because of that experience, and I then got a call from the army, who told me that destruction of weapons was happening in Ciudad Juárez, the one that you're seeing right now. And they told me if I wanted to keep those guns, to do more shovels. And at that point I hadn't finished planting the shovels yet, so I was interested in keeping the metal, but then I decided to do something different, and this that led to a project that is called Disarm, that are instruments made with those gun parts. So, for instance, like something as cutting the barrel of a shotgun or a rifle, just will produce a note when percuted, and for instance, this is a kind of a what's the name of this instrument? It's like a harp. Yes, it's like a harp. There's another word for it. Psaltery? Lira. Yeah, it's like a lira or a psaltery. This is a violin, and a saxophone and a flute. And by doing holes, etc., you have these different sounds. This is. The result has been evolved into another generation of instruments, where, for instance, this one that is called cañonófono, which is many barrels of rifles and shotguns that are cut, and depending on how long and also the kind of thickness of the material, etc., they will have a different note, no? So this is a 3 octaves sort of, not like a piano, but it can be, like if you want to play Bach or Mozart, etc., you can do so by by connecting a keyboard, or just like putting a score on the controllers, and it will play itself. This is called the Kalishnikov, and it's made with the chargers, the clips of the AK-47. This is a wing, it's like a chime. I can show you a little bit of them in action here. So, well, it performs as a kind of, like as a kind of, where am I showing this? But, oops, where is it? Lost my, okay. So, there's, the shovels, the instruments, and other projects are part of a kind of almost like I see it as like a never-ending undertaking that is, different strategies to try to reduce the number of weapons entering Mexico. This one, in the kind of change, like under that umbrella of that project I recently made in Tampa, Florida, another project called Amendment to the Amendment, where I invited the group of people that you see here that were invited by the University of South Florida to rewrite the Second Amendment. Because most of, obviously when you try to address the issue of guns, one of the main when the conversation gets stuck is very much about like that piece of legislation that was written 200 years ago. And that is, I believe that is almost like if you ask a Mexican about the Virgen de Guadalupe, like they really like hold on to that, to the Second Amendment, and it wouldn't, like you better not mess with it. But I don't think that it's about like what is the right interpretation. I thought that it was like appropriate to dare to rewrite it. Just to request like the kind of collective exercise to write it again. This is an example of the session.
Very eloquent way. But basically want to take the first part out, that we don't need the right to have a militia. That's irrelevant anymore. And that it shouldn't be a complete right, but something with a lot more serious restrictions, and however you say that, like a lawyer, that's how we say it.
Being necessary to the right of personal safety and the security of the people's state, those in good health, without violent history, education of the firearm, and of sound mind shall not be denied the right of a lawfully manufactured firearm.
The right of individuals to keep and bear arms, again, getting rid of the whole militia thing. The right of individuals to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless the exercise of this right infringes on the freedom of others.
A well-regulated and informed populace standing together in support of security for a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms in limited capacity and registered account that shall not be infringed upon.
So we came up with a well-regulated military being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of people to keep and bear arms shall also be well-regulated.
So we were very similar to our neighboring group over here, and the fact that this was written so long ago, and so we should just update it. So we changed it to a well-regulated militia defined as the National Guard, being necessary to the security of a free state, should not be infringed. The right of individual citizens to keep and bear arms may be infringed for the security of the state and individual.
Our group has agreed that abolish the Second Amendment, guns only for hunting purposes and armed forces. Militaries have to turn in their guns after work. There is a need for background checks.
So there were all these different iterations, and I think that as a kind of exercise was very interesting just to see that, just to kind of unfreeze or that thing that seemed to be very, very untouchable. Just to end, I would like to show one last project that happened last November, organized by the Queens Museum in New York, and it's called PON, or the People's United Nations. I was interested in this kind of a playful use of the word, and the fact that the building where the Queen's Museum is right now used to be the former venue of the United Nations when it was formed, and also that as a city, it's Queens is may be one of the places in the world that has the highest ethnic diversity. So this is the same room where the exhibition took place, is where the General Assembly used to gather, and many events like the partition of Palestine or the partition of south of North Korea took place. You know, like an arguably very problematic decisions. But now turned into a museum, it was like the venue for this conference, where, you know, like in the UN there's 193 registered states, and many of them are, you know, like we managed to identify 160 delegates. There are many small islands in the Pacific Ocean that were kind of difficult, but most of the countries in the world were represented, and people participated again in this kind of big role game, where they took very seriously like the role of speaking, well, for, you know, for their countries, for the planet, and like it was organized as a conference with a number of different how to speak, you know, how to say, like events. I will tell you a bit about one. Well, yes, for instance, there's one that is called it was called Pond Times, and it was a game or an activity where you had to sit in a group with another 6 persons, and you had to like share what was the thing that you were most ashamed about your country. Like, what was the most embarrassing fact or situation that was like part of your contemporary life of the country you come from. And then, once you had like confessed that embarrassing fact, you had to work with the group to turn it around into the most positive, optimist, idealist, utopian outcome, in such a way that if you opened the newspaper in an ideal world, you would find this headline that was like a total hilariously optimistic headline about your country. And then, you know, like that had to be made into a headline, and that was read to the rest of the group. So this is an example.
Countries' names and one of your headlines or tweets, please.
Helena from Ethiopia, but I'm representing Somalia.
Claire from Rwanda.
Sasha from Montenegro.
Simone from Azerbaijan.
Paulo from the Philippines. So we all collectively agreed on the following headline. The Philippine government announces joint initiative with the Catholic Church to open free birth control centers and abortion clinics nationwide.
That is radical and revolutionary thinking. Thank you. I'm Annette from Barbados.
Nadine from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Carolina, Costa Rica.
And our headline says, no forced entry. And that is dealing with the subject of rape. And we're going to have a day where everyone around the world is going to wear a vagina badge. And it's going to say, no forced entry.
For the current situation in Syria. The first is, filmmakers flock to Damascus to shoot historic war movies. So I guess it wasn't that tasteful.
We actually have a headline from the future, year 2130. November 23rd, 2130, remembering our nation's separation between the North and South Korea, celebrating our union of 50 years anniversary.
And then we have one from Turkey. The problem in Turkey, of course, is right now has the highest number of journalists in prison, and so the idea was to make prison a kind of journalistic mecca and develop journalism within prison. So the headline is Turkish Prison Times Sweeps the Pulitzers.
In Sri Lanka, very similar to Turkey, but in our country, they don't get to stay in prison, they go elsewhere. So our headline is, choose a career in Sri Lankan journalism, extended government-sponsored trips abroad.
We can come up with the alternative of the Olympics called the Paralympics. Basically, corruption Olympics. And people will be competing in Forgive-a-thon, Bribe-a-thon, Hackathon, and boundary boxing.
That was one of the sessions. The one here in the picture was the blessing of the bees. Before we had our food, we had to say a prayer that was like a kind of animist prayer, thanking the bees. But also, like as a kind of I asked a friend who's a poet, to write this kind of a blessing, non-denominational, like a kind of a very animistic blessing, thanking the bees for the work they do. But I believe that there's interesting, like the fact of praying before eating is something that even if you're an atheist, you should do. I'm interested in that thing. But the food itself was some new dish that was a cricket burger, and it was called the grasshopper. So it was also about like how, you may endorse that, that insects are the future, the food of the future, but the idea was that you had to walk the talk and put your, and people that I enjoyed very much. I asked some friends who have a Mexican restaurant to prepare this new dish, and where the meat, instead of meat, we were using grasshoppers or crickets. One of the sculptures that was hanging in the space was called the drone dove. That was, also like, it's almost as if like the same kind of operation of turning like a gun into an instrument. I also imagined like drone technology, instead of being used to kill at a distance, how could it be like that? That it could be turned into a peace dove that would like perhaps be used in conflict zones. And another activity was called the Ghost of Garcia Robles. Garcia Robles, the man on the left, was a Peace Nobel Prize, Mexican Peace Nobel Prize, that persuaded all countries in Latin America to sign a treaty called the Tlatelolco Treaty. So all countries in Latin America agreed that no nuclear weapons were ever to be used, bought, developed, or stored in Latin America. So it's the kind of only part of the world that such thing is. And he used to work in this same building where the exhibition happened. So, ghosts always come back because they have unfinished business. And I had someone, like an actor, play his role as if he had come from the past, and then he requested signature from all the other countries and got signatures from every single country, and then we delivered those signatures to the real UN.
Are there any questions for Pedro? Please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic over.
I have a question, Pedro, because it was really interesting for me to see again in the Sanatorium. I only checked during Documenta. I had no time to repeat again my experience in Whitechapel. I never saw it there. But after your explanation, it comes to me a lot of ideas about healing, about this history of the healing in contemporary art, mainly through a lot of women artists, through feminism. But after all your explanation, also come up to me this question. It's very direct and very simple. Could you see your project inside of institutional critique about the museums and art centers? Because of course that there is this part about education to know ourselves, ourselves, and also this idea of the healing. But on the other hand, knowing your career as an architect and all of your projects, your community projects, but also or your research into spaces and how the museum art galleries is the behavior of the people there, and also the curators and the artists. Because all of the time when I saw this, it came up to me the idea that maybe the perfect person to be on Sanity is an artist or a curator. I don't know, what do you think about?
I mean, the question of, I don't believe much in institutional critique, because I have a problem with the idea of critique itself, because I think that there's a general assumption that critiques leads to change. And I think that critique in itself has very little agency, because it's the definition of the problem, but defining the problem has still to go a long way. Like saying what is wrong is very, very, very far from saying how would you make it right. And I think that, what I'm interested in is, how do you reinvent institutions, and then you have to become the problem. You cannot think of yourself as outside the problem and then saying, oh, you're doing wrong on this and that. You have to try to find within the institution what are the energies, wills, and resources and how can they be rearranged so some improvement, like even if it's millimetrical, it takes place. So I mean, for instance, for me, museums are like a little bit like sometimes like a fridge, where you place objects for posterity and they're kept in perfect temperature conditions, and sometimes like an oven where you put ingredients and then you cook something. And obviously, in a fridge you can just leave it there, but the oven you have to be checking out, because if you let it for too long it will burn, or so you have obviously using the museum as an oven is more labor intensive and all that, but I believe that museums can play the role of a kind of incubator for a new kind of institution or project or program that may have after a real viability in the world, and that museums can be, in such situations, agents of change. But I don't know if that answers.
Okay, another question here.
Yes.
Pedro, thank you very much for your talk. Enjoyed it thoroughly. I guess my question is very simply, it's a practical one, and it goes along the line of who makes the work?
And the way I'm thinking about who makes the work is, of course, you are making the work, but you are, through the practical extension of your work, you are often in a kind of political accent, you are making a kind of populist gesture where you are distributing the rules and the conditions through forms of discourse or talk of other people making these works, like Sanatorium or the work that I see here with the United Nations on PUN. But in order for these works to be done by other people, is it you who decides, I guess almost in political theory, are you the sovereign? Are you the one who decides what goes in, what goes out? Or are you, even maybe from an architectural background, and I'm not an architect, I might be naive in saying this, but do you also have a team of consultants or people that you go to within the process to decide and generate this kind of work, which I think is transformative through the process? Anyways, just go along with what you were just saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for instance, like the question, when you do participation, I think that that there has to be kind of a mix of bottom-up spontaneity and a top-down structure, no? Because, for instance, if you say, "Oh, I'm going to do a participation project where I'm going to provide pencils and everybody can draw whatever they want on a wall, or or have a microphone for everyone to say something, etc." I mean, you may have a number of interactions, but the more specific that is the kind of input that you request from the participants, the deeper and richer that those, as someone who's participating, constraints are extremely useful. They produce better results, and so I mean, it's and this happens in all kind of games, no? If you don't have rules, there's no game. So it's a mix of both things, and you have, I mean, for instance, if you see, for instance, the example where they had to create headlines for their countries, no? That I mean, for instance, the kind of rationale behind that is the kind of inner workings of how a joke works. In a joke, you have the setup and the punchline, and the setup, it's a warning of something that is going in the wrong direction. Also, for instance, you say, "Oh, someone goes to the doctor, and the doctor tells him, there's not much time left. I'm afraid that the analysis that we got show that your disease is not developing well. I'm afraid there's very little time left, only 10, and the patient says 10 months or what? It says no, 10, 9, 8, 7, So, for instance, you have the setup, and then the punchline is something that is so far below your expectations that the way that you handle the shock is with laughter, no? It's like an airbag that cushions the collision of your expectations with reality. And reading about how jokes work, I thought, well, why does it happen if the differential between the punchline and the setup, instead of going towards the negative, goes to the positive? Because sometimes there's few jokes that are about something that is hilariously optimistic, no? So too good to be true. But that has to do with what kind of creative process you want, because often. And that has to do with the question about institutional agency versus institutional critique. I am interested in the collective and the spontaneity to lead to visions that are stepping stones for change. No? So you have, for instance, I believe that the case of Turkey being the country with most journalists in prison, And that in this brainstorm, there was like one journal that, because there are so many journalists in prison that sweeps the Pulitzers, I believe that's something that could actually happen. You know, you could actually make a newspaper that is an online paper just pulling whatever people in Turkish prison write. You know, it's not like totally crazy. It could happen, no? So those kind of, those kind of things seem totally silly and impossible until someone does it. But I think that the idea is, how do you set up the rules for ideas to emerge? And then you bring just a lot of people, and then from hearing someone else's ideas, you will get more ideas and create that kind of a collective creativity.
Pedro, I wanted to ask you about the instruments made out of arms. I have seen the installation at the Carnegie International, peering down on it, but also when we visited your studio in Mexico and we saw you handed out pieces and we were able to hold them. Have you had any experience with, what struck me was, as a Canadian and perhaps fairly sheltered, I've not witnessed any serious violence except on television or in the newspapers, but I was thinking how someone, say a former child soldier, have you had any reaction from someone who has been the victim or a participant in that violence, looking at that art and how the art and music that is formed affected their lives?
Well, I think that my hope would be that this project is taken as a into the like a kind of a state-sponsored project to turn for disarmament. And that's why it's the factor of capturing people imaginations is important, because I think it's almost like you're almost entering the domain of pop culture or marketing, or because I believe I think of this particular project as how could it be embraced, and I'm often trying to persuade state governments, etc., to take on it, and hopefully sometime it can be made into a a combined effort with the weapon recollection campaigns that are conducted. No? I'm not sure if I am answering your question, but just to say that often, and this is curious because the term instrumentalization is often seen as a derogatory term, because you're using art for one purpose which is not aesthetic. But I am interested in instrumentalization. I think that some projects could really be used for and accountable for certain social improvements, but obviously not all. And it would be dogmatic to think that art has to change or to produce change. But few projects could be used for that purpose. Not everything I do has that intention, and I don't expect that other artists' work or art in general has that intention. But art should not be denied the possibility to attempt that. No.
Any last questions? One here.
How would you deal with the notion that in Ontario we produce an enormous amount of the mining in Baker Lake in northern Ontario provides the raw material for much of the bombs, much of the nuclear bombs that get made in the world. And we kind of wash our hands and pretend that we are a nation that's peace-loving and that we don't make nuclear bombs and we don't use them. But in fact, Quebec, Manitoba, and British Columbia don't mine anymore for this reason. But in Ontario, we mine a lot. And how would you as an artist bring this to the forefront? It seems like we as artists here don't do it. We have a government, a federal government, that seems to be an arm of both nuclear and gas interests. And the world who kind of thinks Canada's a peaceful nation. But we have nuclear scientists that believe that the disaster in Japan probably was created from materials that came from Ontario. As an artist, how would you deal with it? And are you, even as a Mexican artist, are you aware that this is happening here in Ontario?
Well, I wasn't aware. I am aware of the environmental disasters conducted by Canadian companies in Mexico. It's like the mining that Canadian companies do in Mexico is like really terrible. But I wasn't aware of this, and it's a very interesting question. But the question, it's very curious that we believe that we often think of nuclear arms as something of the past, and as if the Cold War era was behind us. But there's so many nuclear weapons that continue to be produced and sold and traded, and nobody talks about it. And I think that it has, art or culture has a very powerful role. Because we grew up with the fear of nuclear annihilation. I wanted to do a nuclear shelter in my backyard, and all those weapons are still there. And nobody cares about them anymore. So I think that there's a lot of material for a good movie or something that can be, and most probable, unfortunately, the world will end sooner by a nuclear strike that happens somewhere than by global warming, or a combination that global warming may lead to a kind of a nuclear conflict. And it's like the most stupidest thing that we will ever do. That's like it's incredibly pathetic reality. I'm laughing. It makes me nervous. Yeah.
Well, that might be time to wrap it up then. Thank you so much, Pedro, for your time tonight.